This podcast was recorded on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation.
There it is, the greatest election result in all of human history. It is absolutely amazing. I've got no time for introductions. Let's get right into it. So what happened? What happened? I mean, obviously, this election result came as a massive shock to a lot of people. Not a shock if you were listening to The Real Story with Joe Hildebrand, because we predicted it and we said all along that there would be a majority, and we went through all the seats and said where it would come from. But even with that, even with my confidence, even with Albo's confidence, even with Timmy G's confidence, even we were flabbergasted. This exceeded even the Prime Minister's own expectations. It exceeded pretty much every Labor supporter's wildest dreams. So it looks like at the moment that Labor will probably end up with maybe something like 90. There's a couple of seats that could actually fall to independents. I'll get to that very shortly, but it's sitting at about 88. So far, Labor has wiped every Greens electorate off the map. There is still a contest in Ryan, which is between the Liberals and the Greens, but that is too close to call. Labor has won back Brisbane, as expected, Griffith, as hoped, but unsure, and you just wouldn't believe this. You would not believe it. It has taken back, for the first time, Adam Bandt's seat of Melbourne, the Greens leader's own seat, which he's held for more than a decade, since Lindsay Tanner retired following the massive Rudd spill when Julia Gillard took on Kevin Rudd. Adam Bandt has been sitting in that seat ever since then, in 2010, and Labor looks to have won it back 52.5% two-party preferred to 47.5% two-party preferred for the Greens. So just an absolutely phenomenal result for the Labor Party. And just to kind of sweeten the deal, maybe for people like me, the Libs' one kind of tiny little ray of success has come by knocking off Teals. It is a crazy world when you have a Liberal Party led by Peter Dutton, who lost his own seat, by the way, so it's led by him no more. He's not even in the parliament. You have a Liberal Party led by Peter Dutton with massive so-called women problem, similar to the one they had under Scott Morrison. Research that I've been made aware of, private, Labor research and other focus groups and polling that's been done, showed that, get this, 2/3 of women over the age of 35 refused to vote for Dutton. That is a massive cohort. That is millions of people. 2/3, 2 out of 3 women over the age of 35, just think how many people in that category refusing to vote for Peter Dutton because they think he's too much like Donald Trump and the aggro kind of puts them off. And yet, in Teal seats, which are specifically targeted by women in that exact demographic, so Teal candidates are specifically chosen for being slightly middle-aged, certainly over 35. Women over 35, usually as white as the driven snow, so much for diversity, to run in those seats because that was the best antidote to Scott Morrison's perceived women problem in 2022, and it was enormously successful. So it's just, central casting, upper middle class, small L Liberal, kind of lefty, hand-wringing, care about climate change, care about integrity, what used to be called the doctor's wives in Liberal seats. So you'd have, the professional husband who was hard-headed and wanted to balance the budget, and then you had the wife who was more compassionate and cared about asylum seekers, and pollsters started calling them doctors' wives, and they sort of morphed into the Teals. And under Peter Dutton, who should be the very anathema to that, who is the opposite of that, who is turning off women in droves. And that's why he lost other seats right around the country, among a huge amount of other reasons, which we'll get right into because it was the worst run campaign in all of human history. But they still managed to knock off Teals. They've knocked off Zoe Daniel in Goldstein, So Tim Wilson has come back. He's a former MP, former human rights commissioner from the right, which has also made a lot of head spin. But anyway, he's come back in Goldstone, which is basically sort of Brighton and the well-heeled kind of southeast suburbs of Melbourne. And then just sort of north of there in the even more well-heeled leafy eastern suburbs of Melbourne in Kooyong, Monique Ryan is in real trouble. She is just 1,000 votes ahead of her Liberal challenger, Amelia Hamer. So, again, there's about 80% of votes counted at the time we're recording this, and 1,000 votes isn't that much in the grand scheme of things. If maybe just, 1 in 10 or so of the remaining votes to be counted breaks the Libs' way, they could pick up that one too. And again, Zoe Daniel declared victory on election night. Said, I'll go to one, woohoo! And now she's gone, no longer a member of parliament. Monique Ryan also declared victory on election night, woohoo! And she's now had to admit that her seat is in fact in doubt and is by no means safe, certainly by no means declarable. So that's one to watch. The other little nail biter is the seat of Bullwinkle in WA. And the last time I checked, I don't think I've ever seen a result this close. Last time I checked, there was 29 votes in it. So the Libs were just 29 votes behind Labor. So it looked like it was going to Labor, and now the Libs, I think, are 29 behind or 29 ahead. It's just virtually nothing either way. So it's interesting. In that neighbourhood, however, as predicted on The Real Story, I think I might have got it confused with Bullwinkle, but it's actually the seat of Moore in WA, where I mentioned that the disendorsed Liberal member, Ian Goodenough, has cracked the sads, run as an independent, sent all his preferences to the Labor Party, and surprise, surprise, the Labor Party has picked that one up, which again is one that Albo knew they were going to get, and very few people other than you knew or thought they were going to get, because I told you. Well done. Congratulations on being the most well-informed audience in Australian political history and witnessing a result which was not just a majority as predicted, but an absolute landslide, which means that Anthony Albanese will probably be Prime Minister not just for this term, but probably for the next, because there's almost no way, sort of mathematically, structurally, that the Libs can come back. I mentioned that Labor is at about 88 and will probably get to around 90. The Libs, at the time of recording, are on 40. 40. I said they'd be lucky to crack 60. And a lot of people say, oh, come on. I mean, mid-60s, high 60s at least. People thought I was crazy. And I was crazy. I was far too optimistic for them. So 40, that is less than half the number of seats that the Labor Party is going to have in the next parliament. And how you come back from that, look, miracles happen. Anastasia Palaszczuk came back in Queensland from basically a kitchen table. It was called the Tarago caucus because all of them could fit into a van. And she came back, but that was after Campbell Newman went on an incredibly extreme cost-cutting exercise that got basically everyone offside. He thought he could do a bit of a Jeff Kennett and basically overstepped the mark and, again, lost everything, including his own seat. That is not what Labor is going to do in this next term. So it is very, very difficult to see how the Libs can possibly come back, even to get within striking distance at the next election, let alone have any chance of forming government. But we will see. The beauty of politics is that anything can happen. So where does this leave the political landscape? Well, one of the interesting things is that as the Libs win 1, maybe even 2 seats back from the Teals, and there's another Teal running in Bradfield, she may not win. The Teals also, and other independents, are targeting Labor seats. So Teal-funded independents are targeting 2 Labor seats in particular, Fremantle in WA, which is a very kind of trendy, cool, groovy, beachside, waterside suburb in WA. It's kind of the closest thing Perth has to anything cool is Freo. And the local guy there, Josh Wilson, I think his name is, he's been targeted by a Teal independent, and they're winning. And in being in ACT, which again is obviously just a dripping wet left seat, Teal has come after Labor there. And this is something I've been banging on about for a long time, for years, in fact, ever since 2022. The Teals are not Labor's friend any more than the Greens are Labor's friend. People say, the Teals are just a front for Labor. And some people on the kind of Labor/progressive side also think that. And a lot of people who've done work for the Labor Party also done work moonlighting for the Teals. And now the Teals are coming for Labor just as the Greens came for Labor at the last election. These are like cuckoos in the nest. They infiltrate and then they want to kind of cannibalise the Labor Party's support, the Labor Party's base, and take it for themselves. And then, of course, what they want to do is force the Labor Party into incredibly unpopular or disconnected positions on things like climate change, which, of course, I believe in. Of course, we have to take action on, but not everyone can afford such extreme measures, and there are plenty of people who would like to keep their jobs, thank you very much, in the middle of a cost of living crisis. Teals, of course, who come from the richest suburbs in Australia, don't have to worry about that sort of stuff. So they can worry about really, really long-term things like climate change or sort of abstract, holier-than-thou, hand-wringing kind of pearl-clutching issues like, integrity in politics. Integrity like, I don't know, having your husband tear down your opposition's core flutes, Monique Ryan. Integrity like having your staffer, Sally Rugg, work to the bone and then taking you to court. It's just amazing. It's just absolutely amazing. Integrity like robocalls, which Zoe Daniel were done by Climate 200 on behalf of Zoe Daniel in Goldstein. Again, these people talk about, you sit outside of politics and you talk about, we need more integrity. As soon as you're in it, you get just as dirty as everyone else rolling around in the mud. So the Teals are a threat to the Labor Party. They're actively threatening the Labor Party as we speak. They may take 1 or 2 seats off the Labor Party. That may be one of the reasons they fall just shy of 90. But it doesn't matter. And this is the beauty of it. By not catering to what I call the upper middle class left, by not catering towards those, inner city elites, all those people in the inner west with their arts degrees and their fancy houses, people like me, basically, but who don't think like me. By just leaving all them behind and focusing squarely on cost of living stuff, squarely on battlers, squarely on what workers need to survive, what they need to put food on the table. And again, this is an election that Anthony Albanese was always going to just throw money at. And he was almost shameless about it. And he had no compunction about whatsoever. If people were struggling, he would just throw money at them. And now, of course, the government is saying, well, we might have to do something about economic productivity to boost that, to try and get the budget back on track. But again, by doing that, by giving money to punters, by paying attention to punters' financial woes, by not getting distracted by things like The Voice or other culture war issues that both the left and the right think are so important, Albo has been delivered the greatest landslide that I can remember in terms of the circumstances in which the election campaign started, where the government was odds on to lose the election and the coalition was strong favourites to win, to turning around with a thumping massive majority of about 15 seats maybe for the Labor Party, more than double the number of seats of the coalition. The coalition wiped out not just for this election, but probably for the next one too. That is the most phenomenal result I can possibly think of. Wiping out the Greens and maybe taking a couple of Teals down, that's just icing on the cake. I mean, what do you give the election that has everything? A gold watch? And he did it by ditching anything that had the slightest smack, the slightest whiff, the slightest faint aroma of woke. Anything that looked like any kind of ideological crusade, nowhere to be seen in this election. Nowhere to be seen. And the result is that you take all those heartland suburban seats like the Brisbane seat of Bonner. No one thought that was coming. They got close in Longman, swings in Lindsay, out of suburban Brisbane, out of suburban Sydney. Seats that looked like they were lost to the Libs forever. Labor is now in striking distance of, and it's picked up an absolute swag that no one thought possible. And they did it by not being distracted by these trendy ideological causes that keep, the inner city left up at night. They did it by focusing squarely on economic issues faced by suburban Australians. There's almost no politics about it. And you see the contrast between that and what the right was doing during the campaign. Now, Peter Dutton's campaign made every mistake under the sun. All of them. I cannot think of a single thing they got right, and that is no exaggeration. And we're going to dive into that with our special guest after the break. But Peter Dutton's biggest mistake, perhaps, and perhaps what was emblematic of the campaign as a whole, was in the very last week, when there are still those undecided voters out there. People are thinking, have we turned a corner? Am I going to be able to pay off my mortgage? Are my kids going to be able to get into the housing market? Are we really going to get those rate cuts? What's happening with the global economy because of Donald Trump? Am I going to keep my job? Is there going to be a recession? All this sort of stuff. What's Peter Dutton talking about in the final week of the campaign? Welcome to country. What the actual f***? And again, he and his supporters were doing this, and I mentioned this last week, what an absolute terrible mistake it was. And again, you've seen the results. Like the one state where the coalition was supposed to pick up seats, even if it failed everywhere else, they still thought they'd pick up seats in Victoria because of the absolute basket case that the Allen government is, and the overhang from the Andrews government, and the outrageous stuff that they put their citizens through during COVID. And what did Peter Dutton do? He starts talking about culture war issues, starts talking about welcome to country, and he thinks that, and he's being told by his supporters, being egged on by yes men who are now kind of scratching their heads, saying, yeah, this is how you beat the voice. This is how you won. This is when you were strongest. Go after all that woke stuff. But the thing was that the voice lost because people didn't want to talk about that in the middle of an economic crisis. And Peter Dutton lost because people didn't want to talk about welcomes to country in the middle of an economic crisis. And so the coalition was doing the actual opposite of what it should have been doing, but thinking it was doing the exact same thing. It's an incredible lack of understanding as to where the majority of Australians lie and where the majority of Australians sit on the political spectrum. And it's something that bedevils people on both the left and the right. They get all head up about issues like Palestine. What happened to that? Tony Burke still got his seat. Jason Clare still got his seat. The Muslim vote broke on the rocks. People just want help in their lives. They want to get on with their lives. They want to give their kids a better start in life than they had. And apart from that, they just want the government to get out of the way. Just let them live their life. They don't want to be browbeaten or berated with what's happening in Palestine or why they have to sacrifice their economic means for, a target in the future, or integrity. They don't care about any of that stuff. They just want food on the table, and they want to know tomorrow the sun will rise, they'll have a job to go to and a roof over their heads. It's really not that hard. Well, as I just mentioned, and as indeed blind Freddie could see for himself, the Liberal Party had an absolute train wreck of a campaign, and they now have to find a way to rebuild, to move forward, determine their next leader, their next policy settings, their next strategy, to somehow become within cooee of forming government, not even at the next election, but possibly the one after that. And someone who has been right in the middle of that effort, that push to make the Liberal Party more relatable to sort of mainstream middle Australia is my next guest. She is the founder of Hilma's Network, which was named after one of the first Liberal suffragettes. Yes, they had them in this country more than a century ago. She is Charlotte Mortlock, and she joins me now on The Real Story. Charlotte, how are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on, Joe.
Look, it's an absolute pleasure, and I'm going to, I might even slightly embarrass you to start with, because I've been trying to get you on the podcast for a while, and you very nobly said you didn't want to come on and diss the party before the election because you're a good, loyal servant of the Liberal cause, the Liberal movement. And I think that was very, very noble of you. Much as I was upset to be deprived of an incredibly talented, insightful guest, I thought that sort of shows that you are not a wrecker. You are someone who actually has the Liberal Party's interests at heart. And I wanted to preface our chat with that because, again, you are someone who wants the party to win, and it's pretty obvious that they're not going about it the right way now, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And thanks for prefacing that, Joe. I know that, I am disruptive to the party, and certainly there's a lot of people in the Liberal Party who don't agree with me speaking so openly about our flaws and issues, but I do try to do it at times that aren't super destructive for the party, because ultimately I'm a Liberal Party member myself and I want us to do well. But this is kind of the issue, is that you get these small windows for reform in a political party, and they're often after an election loss. And if you don't take it in that window, you never get reform. Because soon enough, in a couple of months' time, if I try and do this, they'll say to me, hey, we're doing pre-selections for the New South Wales election, don't be disruptive at the moment, or there'll be another state. And so you have to really be quite opportune with the time that you go out and stick your head out and say, hey, we've got to do something about this.
Well, there is no more opportune moment than now, because the Liberal Party is literally leaderless. Peter Dutton has lost his seat. He is no longer a member of Parliament, and there is an upcoming leadership ballot in which it's been suggested that the most likely ticket could be Angus Taylor as leader and Dan Tehan as his deputy. And this is something that you, I know, have enormous concerns about, and said, look, we've just come from an election where we got absolutely thumped because we have a women problem, and now we're going to have an all-male leadership team. Tell us about I think you said that if they did that, they were quote-unquote morons, which is a lovely choice of words, the sort of thing that I might say myself. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I've given a few rogue quotes these weeks, just because I think sometimes you've got to be really plain speaking to get your point across. It would be moronic if they picked two men after what we have just gone through. This is potentially too radical for them, but if it was me in there and I was selecting our next leader, I would pick two fairly unknown fresh faces to be the leader and the deputy, because what the public has said to us, and this has kind of been a slow-moving thing for a long time. This hasn't happened overnight, this kind of disdain towards the Liberal Party, particularly from younger voters, particularly from women. It hasn't happened in an instant. It's happened really incrementally. And what we need to show is that we hear you loud and clear. And the fastest way we could do that is by doing something radical that is quite symbolic. And in my opinion, that would be putting a female as leader and also as deputy. But I would pick a fresh face. I would pick someone that is relatively unknown, who's fairly centrist, and, that would be, I think, make people sit up and go, oh, gosh, the Liberal Party are taking this seriously.
So not Susan Ley then, the current deputy?
No, I 100% would support Susan as well. I think that she
But you think a fresh face would be better?
Yeah, I think that Susan could be fantastic, and then I'll just pick a deputy who's really fresh. I mean, if Zoe McKenzie's a great option. Senator Maria Kovacic's a great option. One of my favourite men is Keith Wallahan. He is on a nice edge at the moment. He might lose his seat, but he is 100% leadership material for our party, and he would speak so well to the voters that we need to recapture. So there's a few options there that are fresh faces that I think would work well.
Now, you mentioned Maria Kovacic there. She has just come out and said that the coalition needs to immediately dump its nuclear plan. Its nuclear plan to build nuclear power reactors in Australia, because that is just toxic to younger voters. They just think that's bonkers. What other policies or positions or statements do you think have brought the party undone in the last election campaign in terms of losing younger voters, women voters, and also ethnic voters? Because a lot of that strong rhetoric on immigration seems to have turned off a lot of people from non-Anglo backgrounds.
Yeah, so I think, as I spoke about before, about this slow drift away from the Liberal Party, particularly with young voters, that really all started when the coalition kind of 15 years ago refused to admit that climate change existed, or refused to accept that it was happening. And then it kind of moved to, we accept that it's happening, but it's not man-made. All of this resistance towards climate change is 100%, I think, really to blame with the initial drift away from us. And now I think we're at the point what we should have been at 15 years ago of saying, okay, we accept that it's real, we accept that it's man-made, but now it's the how of how we do it. And that is what the Conservative Party in the UK, they never made climate a left versus right thing. They just said, we're going to be the best people to fix it. And that is what we should have done from day dot. So climate is going to be a really important part of the coalition's rebranding. And it should always have been us making the argument of why we're the best economic delivery of that, and also just, in terms of transition for jobs and whatnot. Other things that I think, I think credit to us, I think the social media stuff, I've spoken to you about this before, particularly my very passionate hatred of algorithms, but social media bans for kids under 16s, that was a coalition policy initially before it was adopted by Labor. I think that was a good one. If it was me, I would actually go a step further and force those big social media giants to be transparent about algorithms. I think there is barely a person at the moment in existence who doesn't think that that is a big deal. And then we've got to get back to talking about, our economic policy and making sure that we are actually, that whole thing of like the coalition is always the better economic operators. Well, we have to start coming up with some better economic ideas. I thought we were really light on that, not only in this election campaign, but really throughout the whole term. I didn't think we offered enough that was creative. I think, the Teal, particularly Allegra Spender, has been one of the more vocal people on tax. Like, that's our space. We should be the ones feeling that, really.
Just while we're talking about the Teals, how do you explain the fact that the coalition has a women problem, that Peter Dutton had a women problem? I mentioned before we spoke to you that about 2/3 of women over the age of 35, it was coming up in research, would not vote for him because they thought he was too Trump-esque or too sort of populist. How has that then translated into two of the Teals being in real trouble, with Zoe Daniels having just lost her seat to Tim Wilson, and Monique Ryan in trouble as well? That would seem to be, I can't quite square that circle. Can you?
Yes, I can, because the Teals pitch. Allow me. The Teals pitch themselves as being centre right, and that was their whole thing. They said we're essentially liberals. We're just disenfranchised,
economically conservative, socially progressive, that sort of thing.
And as time went on in that term, it became rapidly clear that that wasn't what a lot of them were, that they were far more left-leaning than that. People like Allegra Spender didn't really, see that same issue that they saw for Monique Ryan and that they saw for Zoe Daniels. And I think that is, people still want centre-right women. That is exactly what they are demanding. It's just now with the Teals having some time in, I think that people are starting to see what they actually are standing for. I'm going on about climate a little bit here, but just because I do think that there is an interesting link between climate and women. There was a big study a few years ago that said women between the ages of 18 and 32 were 8 times more likely to care about climate. And I think that's important, because one of the reasons we lost the women's vote, I do actually think, is to do with climate as well, just because, women seem to prioritise it more.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think under the next Liberal incarnation, that will be super important. But I do find it interesting that, given that Peter Dutton was clearly seen as someone who couldn't be taken seriously on climate change by the entire electorate, and it was a second-tier issue anyway. But it's interesting that the vote against the Teals, and I'm sensing, I figure, and I think what you're saying is the Teals in Melbourne in particular made themselves so unpopular and so obviously and transparently lefties dressed up as righties, that it sort of wouldn't matter who was in charge of the Liberal Party. There was clearly an electorate there that felt duped. And you're absolutely right that the Victorian Teals do seem to lean much more to the left and more openly to the left than the Sydney Teals. And that, I think, has been a real point of difference. Another point I want to raise with you, and it's a point that you made, so you're the right person to raise it with, is that the party seems in the last 3 years to sort of degenerated into what you might call, old man shaking fist at clouds. That it's a party of sort of angry, reactionary, muscular kind of politics, if you like. The sort of, quasi-populist, a bit like Donald Trump, getting dragged into these culture wars. How dare they welcome us to our own country? I'm just going to stand in front of one flag. There's too many migrants coming here. All that stuff that Peter Dutton was being cheered on by, and I liken it to a cliff he was sort of teetering on the edge of, and all his supporters saying, just one more step and you're there, sir. Just one more step and you've got it. That just doesn't seem to play well in Middle Australia, especially with compulsory voting.
Yeah, so I think that was a really interesting thing that happened this election. When Trump got up in November, there was this huge support of yes, there's this vibe shift, go woke.
Woke is dead.
Yes.
Yep.
Now, I actually was, I was a pro Kamala Harris person, not because I thought she was fantastic, not because I thought the Democrats were fantastic. I actually think they're horrid. They need to completely redo themselves as well. But right. I thought that Trump was going to be a huge risk. But when he got in, there was, 10% of me who was like, we needed that vibe shift. The world needed to calm down a little bit on the woke stuff. We need to stop policing, demonising. At that point, the Canadian Conservatives, our Conservative Party, everyone started booming. It's over. Conservative Party's racing for it. Then, and I think this is the week we lost the election, Trump did the Ukraine press conference. And everyone thought, oh no, holy shit, he's batshit crazy.
Yep.
That week, everyone was like, okay, better the devil you know, go safest option. Safest option is Albo. Even if he's a bit boring, just go centre.
Yep.
And that was the same week that the Liberal Party announced our ridiculous work from home policy, which was just a red rag to a bull for women, which was just ludicrous. But it was also the same week that Cyclone, was it Alfred? I can't even remember its name anymore.
Cyclone that wasn't Alfred, because it was a tropical storm by the time it made landfall, but yes.
That also delayed the election by a month.
Yep.
I don't think we had enough policy in the tank to survive another month of a quasi-campaign. So I think in that week we lost. But to the Trump factor, I always thought that it was kind of unfair that people were trying to say that Dutton was Trump, because I think that he actually, sure, people can say Australian politics are like American. They're nothing like that. We are nowhere near as polarised. The Liberals are not the Republicans. And we are allowed to speak about immigration. We are allowed to speak about government efficiency. And that doesn't mean you're a Republican, MAGA person. But there is a cohort of our Liberal Party membership that is diehard MAGA, or, certainly further right than the vast majority of Australians. And that is a problem for us, because we have a membership that we are hamstrung to completely, because even our MPs that get up, they've got their own pre-selection again in 18 months' time where only the members vote. And I don't think that Australians understand the pre-selection process. So they don't understand why the Liberal Party is why it is, but it is because we are hamstrung to our membership. So we have to create policy that placates our members. And unfortunately, that policy is often repellent to broader society. And God love Australia, we have the best democracy in the world because we have preferential voting, because we have compulsory voting. We are always going to, elections are won from the centre. So we have to kind of figure this out, how we can make sure that our MPs keep getting pre-selections. Because if anyone puts their hands up now, other than me, because I'm not facing a pre-selection because I'm not running, and says, I support quotas, you don't win your pre-selection. You'll be punished.
That's right.
And that's the same with climate. If anyone says, I love renewables, you won't get pre-selected. So,
and ironically, similar to what happened with the Republicans in the midterm elections, they couldn't get pre-selected without Trump's approval, but the MAGA candidates were overwhelmingly rejected by the broader electorate. So the parallels just keep coming. Charlotte Mortlock, if you were pre-selected, I would vote for you. I'd rat on the Labor ticket just for you.
Wow.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joe. What an honour.
As they say in the Labor Party, vote early, vote often. Thank you so much for joining us on The Real Story. I think you've absolutely nailed it.
No worries. Thanks so much, Joe.
And that is all we have time for this week. Please send us a message at therealstory@novapodcast.com.au or slide into my DMs on the gram. Joe_Hildebrand is my handle. And you can leave us a review, only good ones. You can leave us a rating, only 5 stars. And of course, you can catch me every Monday and Saturday in the various News Corp papers right around the country, where you will know what is actually happening in the world because I'm right about everything. God love you all. See you next week.